All right, welcome everyone to Eikon. Man, really excited about today. There are so many things going on. You heard us mention a few. You heard some in the announcements. I want to let you know about a couple of things real quick. One, coming up, we have a course that we're offering called Financial Peace University, and that's going to be happening in a few weeks. And we offer this just a few times a year. It's put on by Dave Ramsey and his team, and this is a great course just to help get your finances in order. If you've never had a budget, or you have a budget, or you kind of go month to month hoping the money lasts to the end of the month, this would be a great course to sign up for. You can sign up online, or they have a table out in the lobby. So we wanted to let you know there's still a few more weeks, still some slots available, but this is going to fill up quick. So make sure to sign up for that. And then also I want to let you know next week, we're continuing the series that we're in. We're in a series called Frequently Asked Questions, where we're answering questions that many of you submitted. Last week we talked, as you heard Benji reference, about suffering and pain, and what do you do with the problem of pain in life, and we talked about that. This week, I'll talk about that in a moment, but next week, we're going to be talking about a subject that I want to make you aware of now, in advance of next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about sex. So here's the thing. If you have young children that you take with you into service, next Sunday might be a good Sunday not to do that. So either if they are of age to go into e-kids to do that, but if they're in middle school or high school, our wonderful brand new youth pastor, Amanda Martinez, is going to be opening up the youth lounge for all of the middle schoolers and high schoolers that don't want to feel awkward in service. So unless you want to have a very interesting conversation on the drive home, if you keep your kids in here with you in service, next week might be a good week to prepare for it. Also, it is going to be a great week that I'm really excited for, really thrilled for you guys to be a part of that. That's going to be fun. What's even better, my wife's going to be talking about it. So, you do not want to miss that one. It's going to be fun. All right, so here's the deal. This week, we're continuing our series, Frequently Asked Questions, where different people submitted questions. Many of you submitted questions in, and we picked a few of them to address. And today, we're going to take this one question, and it kind of came in a lot of different ways. People ask questions like, is it a sin to drink, or can you smoke, or is this okay, and is that a sin, and can I date kind of whoever, and when I'm dating whoever, can we do whatever, or like, where's that line? If I know I can't do that, can I do this? So we got all kinds of questions. And if you've been coming to church for any amount of time, you're probably familiar with these types of questions. If you have children, you've been asked some of these terrifying questions where you're like, no, you can't do that, because I said, and God will be mad. You know what I mean? Like, we all kind of get those questions, right? Like, we've all had those. So I was trying to think, like, how could we sum up all of these questions in one big question? So the question we're going to be addressing today is, can I do that? Like, that thing, can I do that? Is that okay? Is God going to be mad? Is that a sin? Is that, like, what does God say about this? Because clearly he says a lot about this, but he doesn't really mention that. Or, and these different questions that we have from time to time, well, that's what we're going to be talking about today, is this idea of, can I do that? Now, here's the thing. There's a question behind this question. Now, if you've, again, had maybe a high schooler or someone ask you some of these questions, the real question becomes to come a little bit more clear. Most of us don't ask this question exactly, but there's this underlying intent in this type of question. And the question behind the question is, how close can I get to sin without sinning? Like when I'm filing my taxes, what exactly do I have to include? When I'm doing this or I'm doing that, or when it comes to this issue, like I know the line's here, but how close to the line can I get? You see, this is inherent in this kind of question of, well, can I do that? And what we have to do is, here at Eikon, our mission at Eikon Church is we want to help people become more like Jesus. Like, that's our goal. We just want to become more like him. So I think to understand this question of, how close can I get to sin without sinning, and can I do that, we should probably look to Jesus and what he has to say about certain things and what his teachings are on this subject. Now, you have to understand something. this idea of like questions and how close can I get to the line and can I do that, can I do this? This was nothing new for people in Jesus' day. This is something that had been around for a long time. In fact, the Jews of Jesus' time, because Jesus was Jewish, so they actually had a list of different laws and commands that they got from their Old Testament, from the covenant, the law that God had given them. And there were actually 613 commands. And these are those 613 commands. And on every one of these pages, there are just dozens of commands. And, I could stop right here and you shall not eat new grain until the appointed time. So bet you didn't know that. And they would want to know like what different things they could do. How about this one? Definitely don't make any sacred pillars to Hashem, for God hates them. And I don't like Hashem either. And you could just go through this list and there's just dozens and dozens. And I'm telling you, all of these are just filled with all these commands. And these are the rules that Jesus kind of stepped into when people are asking, well, is this okay? Is that okay? And what would happen many times is actually, though these are a lot of commands, don't get me wrong, this doesn't cover everything. So there'd be people that say, well, there's a command about that, but what about this? And what religious leaders of that time would do is they would kind of interpret those. And they'd say, I know it says this, but here's kind of my interpretation. Here's my 2 cents on the matter. And they would kind of add their thoughts on. And this is called the oral tradition. They would add these kind of rules and laws on. And what would happen is people would go up to religious leaders and they say, hey, what is your take on this? What's your take on divorce? And that was actually kind of a hot topic in Jesus' day. And there's actually 2 kind of leading rabbis, religious leaders, and kind of camps of thought. And they'd say, Jesus, kind of where do you land on this? And he responds to this. And many religious leaders would respond things like this, would say things like, well, you've heard it said, and then he'd say a law, but I tell you, and then to give kind of his interpretation of that law. Not a new law, just kind of an interpretation of that. And if you're familiar at all with the Bible or with the life of Jesus, some lights might be going off and you're like, oh, Jesus did that, and he did. And they would come and they'd ask them questions, and religious leaders kind of take on all of these laws, kind of their interpretations was called a yoke. Everybody say yoke. Yoke. Now, what a yoke is a teaching or a set of teachings or works that one would need to follow to be a disciple. So if I want to follow this religious leader, I would ask them about their yoke. What things are important? What do you teach? How do you look at this verse or this, law, this command? And they would say, and then if I want to become like them, if I want to be their disciple, their follower, then I'd have to take that yoke on myself. So what we want to do is we want to look at Jesus. And listen, when we're asking if we can do this or do that, we have to look at what Jesus says. If we want to become more like Jesus, if that's our mission, then we have to understand his yoke, his teachings, what he said about certain situations, about different things. Now, to really understand, to really grasp this, and here's what's going to happen. You're going to have to follow me for a minute, because we're going to do a little bit of history, just real quick, and then we're going to come around. You might be thinking halfway through, like, what does this have to do with beer exactly? Because I'm really curious where exactly this lands on it. And so just follow me. So we have to understand that Jesus steps into something called the Old Covenant. The Old Covenant. Now, this is what we would call it. A covenant is just a promise or an agreement between God and man. And Jesus steps into this Jewish Old Covenant. Now, we call it the Old Covenant, but it wasn't like Jesus didn't call it the Old Covenant. It was just the covenant. Like it wasn't old at that time. And so when we read Old Covenant, when we look at the kind of the rules and the laws that existed in Jesus's day, we call it the Old Testament. So the Old Testament is actually probably better called the Old Covenant. And then we would understand the New Testament as the New Covenant. So there's this old way of existing between humanity and God. And then in the New Testament is a new covenant or new declaration of what it means to live in harmony with God and with man. So that's kind of how that's broken up. Maybe a better way to call this, quite honestly, is Old Covenant. It doesn't mean old in the sense of like it's just older than the other. Like this one's newer, that one's older, but they both kind of exist. The Old Covenant would probably be better called like the former covenant, the prior covenant, the irrelevant covenant. But the problem with calling it that is when you start calling it like the irrelevant testament, people get really mad. Like that, like you get like stoned and people get pitchforks and it's bad. So, and I'm not saying that the Old Testament is completely irrelevant, that we can't learn anything from it. There are great teachings and principles that we can pull out of it. But what I'm saying is these rules of this covenant is no longer what we look to to understand what it means to live in harmony with God and harmony with man. It's the cocoon, if you will, that gives birth to the new covenant. So we want to understand the old covenant first. What's happening in this cocoon so we can better understand what Jesus is teaching. So this understanding of God and man, this setup in the old covenant is kind of this idea that like, I always have to have my eyes to the sky. I want God to bless me. I want God to bless my kids. I want God to bless my crops. So what's going to make him happy? What's going to make him mad? I got to make sure that things are good between me and him. So we're going to call this kind of morality, if you will, this kind of living, this understanding, we're going to call this vertical morality. Now, vertical morality is this understanding of I have to keep my eyes to the sky. What's going to make God happy? What's going to make God sad? What's going to make him mad at me? And there's certain sins that God gets mad about. And apparently there's some that he gets even madder about. And I got to make sure that, I'm good with God. And how I would define vertical morality, I define it this way: peace with God based on keeping peace with God. That how I have peace with God is I just keep the peace between me and God. Now, here's this problem that was inherent in this old covenant. And it was never directly stated, but it was this kind of idea that as long as me and God are good, that's all that matters. Let me give you an example. I could do something to you. I could harm you. I could hurt you. I could do something against you. I could sin against you. And then I go to God. And God, I'm so sorry. God, in the old covenant, they had these different types of sacrifices. And I'm going to go to this temple and I'm going to do this thing. And I'm going to do the sacrifice and the ceremony. And then all of a sudden, me and God are good. Now, me and you are not good. But as long as me and God are good, I'm keeping peace with God and everything's happy. Now, here's the interesting thing. When I was kind of preparing this, when I was thinking about this, when I was thinking about this idea of vertical morality, something struck me. I'm curious, how many of you kind of grew up in church? You grew up in church, most of your life you spent in church. Yeah, I'd say probably half or more of us here in this room. I want you to think about the kind of teachings, the kind of morality that you were taught in church. And here's what I found interesting, and maybe this is just me, but what I found is that the church, more often than not, taught this. They taught vertical morality. As long as God is good, if you do this wrong, if you sin, if you do this thing, then what you have to do is you have to say this certain, and all different churches have these different kind of formulas, you say this prayer, you confess your sin, and God forgives you. And as long as you're good with God, you're good. That's all that matters. Again, you could hurt me and you could do your thing with God and everything's fine. And what I found is it's all about, is God mad at me? What have I done? Is God happy with me? Is God pleased with me? Is there anything I can do? Oh man, I've made him mad. And now I feel this distance between me and God. Isn't that what a lot of us were taught? It's this vertical morality. And then what happens is towards the end of the Old Testament, you have these different prophets and they start saying these really kind of weird, almost kind of cryptic sort of things. They make these prophecies and they start saying things because this vertical morality, this covenant that was created was between not God and a person, but actually God and a nation, the nation of Israel, the Jews. So that's how they understand their covenant between them, the Jewish people, and God. And then you have these different prophets start saying things like, there'll be a river of life flowing through Assyria and Egypt. Now, Assyria and Egypt, those were the bad guys. Whatever terms or labels or whatever that you want to put on it, imagine reading something and you read that God is going to make this river of life flow through this other religion, this other people group, that's the sort of thing. You got to kind of put it in those categories, okay? That's what is happening in their head. And as soon as you're going, whoa, that's what's happening for these people. So we just have to put ourselves in their shoes. So all of a sudden they're backpedaling, they're like, whoa, and they're reading these prophecies and then the Old Covenant, the Old Testament ends. And then the New Testament begins. And it begins really with this one central character. The big story kind of begins with this guy named John. We call him John the Baptist, but he wasn't like a Baptist, like John the Protestant, John the, Presbyterian, he was baptizing people. So John the Baptizer, John the Baptist is going around, and this is his message. He's saying, get ready, get ready, get ready, get ready. You don't want to miss this. If you're not ready, you're going to miss it. Something new is coming. Something new that's going to change everything is about to come. It's coming. Get ready, get ready, get ready, get ready. And that's John's message. And as he's saying this, and just hundreds and thousands of people are coming, these Jewish people, and he's saying, get ready, something's going to change. And listen, this new covenant that's coming isn't just new, it's actually better. It's something way better that's about to come. And John's saying, get ready. Something so much better is coming. Better, not new as in just like updated. Like there's just gonna be this new set of rules, this like covenant 2.0. No, it's completely different. It's like back in the day when we used to have flip phones, right? Like who remembers flip phones? Or I remember having a pager. Dude, I was so cool when I had my pager. Like pagers were it. I remember being in high school and I had a pager, and it was like, I remember it was one of the pagers that I could like take off the clip. And I'd be like, hold on, somebody just paged me. I gotta check my beeper. And like you'd have those codes, remember, like the different numbers mean to different things. If anybody grew up in that age, like, and you have to be like, okay, ooh, 911, I gotta call them right now, you know? And like you'd have these different, and it was so cool. But then like flip phones came out, and it was like, oh, man, it's totally different. Not like the bag phones that you'd carry around or like put in your car, like actual. And then what happened? And then we got the iPhone, right? Like then, like everything changed. And you wouldn't want to, who would want to go back to a flip phone or, you know, a pager when they can have an iPhone or an Android or a Samsung or I'd say Windows Mobile, but let's be real. You know, like you could have like, who would want to have that and then go back to like the old, the antiquated, it's like, again, you don't want to go back to the cocoon once you have the butterfly. So it's not just updated, it's different. It's so much better. So John's saying this is going to be better. It's going to change everything. Get ready. And then one day, John says this. John saw Jesus coming toward him and said, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the Jews. If you grew up in church, if you're familiar at all with John or the Bible, you might know that's actually not what John said. John said something completely different. John said something radical. He said, who takes away the sin of the world. He said it takes away the sin of the world. I mean, this is totally different. John's saying, listen, guys, something is going to change. It's not just for the Jews. Like this new thing that's coming forth, this new way of living, it's different than the old system. It's brand new. So as we look at Jesus and the one who's going to take away the sins of the world, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of morality did Jesus teach? I mean, what was Jesus getting at? What was his yoke? What was his teaching? Was he saying, here's what's really important? What's interesting is Jesus, again, stepped into this context. So he stepped into a context in which people were asking questions. Hey, what do you think's important? And there was this one instance where a religious leader came up and said, Jesus, which of these commands of these 613, which of these is most important? I'm curious what your yoke is. I'm curious what direction you're taking this whole thing. What's most important to you? And Jesus says, oh, okay. And he goes through and he says this. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. So Jesus says, okay, of all the commands you have, of all the 613 and the different things, I would say this is the one that's most important. This is the one I would kind of pick out of there as most important. That's actually command from the Old Covenant, the Old Testament. That somewhere in here is that command. And then Jesus goes, hold on. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So hold on. Before you walk away though, before you leave, there's another one that's kind of tied to that. Again, you guys don't have one that really, I feel like, but the best command is really these two because they're really quite similar. And he's saying, you gotta get this. You have to understand this. And this is huge for those people. He's defining his kind of morality. He's defining what's important and what matters in life. And then, as Jesus interacts, he starts doing things that really kind of stir people up. He starts doing things that break some of these commands. There's this instance where he starts talking to a woman alone. And man, you didn't do that. That wasn't allowed. Jesus breaks one of these commands. And Jesus like heals someone on the Sabbath. And it says you can't do that. You can't work on the Sabbath. And he allows his followers to pick grain on the Sabbath. And the religious leaders are losing their mind because they're saying, Jesus, you can't do that. To the Pharisees, Jesus was sinning. Then he tells the story about a good Samaritan. And again, we lose this in context. Jesus essentially says, this Samaritan person that I'm using as an example is doing a better job as living in harmony with God than you are. This would be like us telling a story of like a good Muslim. I mean, this is radical. The Pharisees, this is why they want to kill Jesus, because he's saying he's, following God, but then he's like breaking these commands, and people are going, Jesus, what are you doing? We don't talk to women. There's this time where they bring this woman up that was caught in adultery, and they say, one of these commands says you have to kill her. We caught her. She's busted. What are you going to do? They're trying to trap Jesus, and he doesn't do it. He doesn't have her executed. I mean, this is not, again, not just an update. You've heard it said, you can stone women. I tell you, probably not. This is completely different sort of thing going on. And then at the end of Jesus' ministry, at the very end of his life, one of his last times with his followers, he gathers them together for this special dinner. And he pulls them all into this room, and he's eating dinner. It's this Passover dinner. He knows he's about to die. He knows that he's about to be crucified, and he knows this is coming. And as they come in, Jesus does something. He takes a towel and he wraps it around his waist, and he kneels down and he begins to wash the feet of the people that come into that room. Now you have to understand, this is the lowliest of lowly positions in that culture in that day and age. This is the position of a servant, of a slave. This is what would happen if you come in and his followers are like, Jesus, what are you doing? Like, get up. Like, you're supposed to be head of the table. Jesus, you're the leader of this thing. What are you doing? And he says, no. I must do this. And he washes their feet. So you got to imagine being one of the disciples. I want you to kind of put yourself there and imagine what this is like. You don't know that Jesus is going to die, but things have been getting worse and worse. Like these Pharisees, these religious leaders have been getting angrier and angrier, and they've tried to kill Jesus on a few different occasions. And you've been in Jerusalem for a little bit of time, and things just keep getting worse. And you see all these different things, and you're going, man, things are not going well. Jesus, we got to get out of here. And Jesus starts saying these kind of weird things, and you think, man, is he going to leave us? So I want you to imagine being there. And then Jesus says, come here. There's something I want to tell you. Something I want to leave you with. And imagine being Jesus. Like Jesus knows he's about ready to leave. So he knows these last few things that I say are going to be the most important things, right? Like we do this. When someone's on their deathbed, they want to say, like, what are the things that matter most in life? It's the things that they want to leave people with. Parents who have kids, you have like a young child that's going to babysit for the first time. And before you leave the house, you're like, what's the most important? Like don't kill your brother and sister, I don't know, whatever happens, don't keep the door locked, whatever it is. It's that last thing you say before you leave. And Jesus, knowing that this is coming, he's like, I got one thing to leave you with. And he says this, and this is crazy. He says, a new command I give you. Guys, we have to understand this. Again, this flies over our heads so many times. Jesus is saying, I'm going to give you something new that's not in here. Now, this is wild because for centuries, what's been happening is religious leaders have been saying, okay, here's what they say. Here's kind of my interpretation of this. And Jesus is saying, I'm going to give you a brand new command, one you've never had before. Now, here's what's wild. These disciples realize something huge is happening because you're not allowed to just make up new rules. That's not how it works. They realize this is the birth of something new. This is the birth of this new covenant, this new command that Jesus is about to give them. And the only person that can give new commands, is God. So they're realizing, I believe that Jesus was the Messiah, but he's going to give us a new command. So you can imagine them leaning in and, this is going to be like this new text that this is it. This is the new covenant. And here's the new command. Love one another. And you're leaning in, you go, what else? Right? Because you're like, yeah, I got that one, Jesus. Okay. Based on that, do what? And you're going, hold on, Jesus, time out. We got that one. I know, hold on, it's in here someplace. And you're like flipping through and you're like, I know it's in here someplace. We have that. And he goes, no, hold on. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. And now, they think back to moments before where Jesus, when he has all the power, all the authority, kneeling down, washing their feet. Hours and days from now, they're going to reflect back on this and remember Jesus dying for them. They're going to remember Jesus hanging on a cross, forgiving those that are killing him. He said, like that is how I want you to love one another. And then Jesus just drives the nail in the coffin. He says, I want to make this a little bit more clear. He says this, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. You want to follow me? You want to become more like me? Then you love other people as I have loved you. And in that moment, Jesus, dying for our sin, took away all of our excuses and gave us a new way to live. Every excuse you thought you had. Oh, hold on. One of these says that, for certain people, like there's, and they believe differently than me and they're a jerk anyway. So, and Jesus takes away every one of those excuses. Everyone. And he gives us a new way to live. Jesus introduces a new kind of morality. You see, before we had this vertical morality and I got to make sure God's happy with me and I got to make sure this is going to make him mad and I really want him to bless my crops and my kids. So I'm going to do this sacrifice. I'm going to do this thing and I want God to be happy and my eyes are in the sky and God, will you be happy? And I don't care if we're not cool as long as we're cool. And Jesus says, nope. Oh, there's a new kind of morality I'm going to introduce and it's called horizontal morality. It says, this is what I want you to understand, that how you love one another. You see, how I would define horizontal morality is I define it like this, is our love for God is demonstrated and authenticated by how we treat those around us. That your love for God is demonstrated and authenticated, not by what I did this one and, this one says no tattoos, whoops, and like, oh man, but it also says don't trim your beard. So the rest of you are in trouble too if you're trimming your beards and, and you create these weird rules and these weird like things and like that one doesn't count because of this and this one. And Jesus says, stop. Your love for me is now going to be demonstrated and authenticated by how you treat those around you. So there's a couple truths we have to know. There's some building blocks that some of this is going to stand on. First and foremost, everyone you are eyeball to eyeball with is someone Jesus died for. That's right. Everyone. Regardless if you agree with them or not, regardless if they're kind or not, regardless if they drive you insane or not, every person you're eyeball to eyeball with is someone that Jesus died for. Secondly, if you mistreat someone whom Jesus died for, you can't be okay with Jesus. Like it doesn't work that way anymore. Like that horizontal morality where it's like, as long as me and God are good and I can treat you horribly, that doesn't work anymore. It's like, I've got kids and if you mistreat my kids and then like say sorry to God and think we're cool, like no, like we have to work this out. You've got to say some things to my kids. You have to apologize. You have to make this right because your love for God is going to be authenticated and demonstrated by how you treat them. So it just flips everything on its head. Now you might be thinking, you're like, well, what does this have to do with like, can I do this? Can I do that? Like, how does this, let me flesh this out a little bit. Let me use one example that growing up, and I was a part in ministry of youth ministry and youth small groups and high school and college age students. And here's a lot of the kinds of questions I got. Let's just be honest. Like, how far is too far, right? It's like, what is sin? Well, where's the line at? Where's that line? Because in vertical morality, you have to define that line. You have to say, well, right here it says you can't do that, so you can't do that. And they're like, word, sweet, I can do this then. You're like, time out. You have heard it said that thou shalt not, but I tell you that you shall, and you're like creating these new rules. Now listen, horizontal morality looks differently. You know what horizontal morality says? You honor that other person. That you never do anything that would dishonor, that would tarnish a future relationship that they have. That you never be someone else's regret. So where's the line? Don't be someone else's regret. Treat them honorably. Don't do anything that would tarnish a relationship that they might have someday in the future. Realize that might be someone else's husband or wife someday. Don't you do anything that dishonors that marriage. See, there are no loopholes with honor. There are no like, yeah, but, well, I mean, it doesn't say that we can't do this. So no, you honor them. See, horizontal morality, it changes things. It reframes the question of like, can I do this? Can I do that? That's all vertical. No, what does it mean to love someone as Jesus has loved us? Or let's talk about generosity, giving. A lot of times in church you hear what? When it comes to giving, man, give to God so you can receive back, pressed down, shaken together, pouring out over all your, that's what we hear, right? You give, you name it, you claim it, baby. You can get that car if you just give God this, right? What kind of morality is that? That's vertical. If you do this for God, he'll do this for you. If you do this, then God will do this. That's all vertical. I'm going to do this so I get something back. No, you know what generosity, you know why you should be generous? You know why? Because it helps people. That's it. It helps people. Not so that you can get some. Now, are those things true? Yeah, sure. But that shouldn't be the ethic with which we live. Oh, I'm going to do this so I get something back. No, that's not why Jesus wasn't like, oh, I'll give my life so I get something in return. No, it helped people, namely us. So our generosity, my generosity, is actually a reflection of what God has done for me. When I look at my resources, I go, God, I want to be generous because I realize you've been so generous to me. It's a realization and a reflection. So of course, God, I'm going to give you back this. Absolutely, you've given me everything. Yeah, I'll give you that. See, we have to understand that when we are asking this question, we need some better statements. Is this okay? Can I do this? Can I do that? Listen, no, tell yourself this. If it's not best for them, it's sin. If it's not best for them, it's sin. So is that best for them? Is that relationship best for them? Is it best for you? You might be able to say I just want to have a drink. That's fine. And you want to go, well, there's this one verse that, let's stop it. But the person with you, is that going to be hard for them? Maybe you don't know. Maybe they're a recovering alcoholic and maybe that's not best for them. Well, guess what? All of a sudden, that's not loving to them. How about this one? If you're underage, I'm going to make this simple. How does your disobedience to the law of the land reflect Jesus' obedience to God? All right, so that just got a whole lot simpler, right? We have to just start looking at it through the lens of Jesus. And then throughout that, from then on, the whole rest of the New Testament, the story of Acts, the early church, all these letters that Paul and these different religious leaders are writing to these different churches, the New Testament imperatives are simply applications of Jesus' new commandment. That's it. They're saying, okay, in light of what Jesus said, in light of horizontal morality, in light of this new covenant, okay, here's the situation you're dealing with. Here's my advice on that situation. Paul, who wrote the vast majority of these letters, never goes back one time and references this old covenant for why they should do this or shouldn't do that. It's all in light of this new teaching that Jesus gave where he said, love one another just as I loved you. It's just all this reflection. So now what we have to understand is the best way to please your Father in heaven is to honor the people around you. Every person around you. And here's the easy thing. We like to honor people that are like us, don't we? Yeah. Isn't it funny, some of the things that Jesus did that ticked people off the most is he elevated the other. Right. Yeah. The religious leaders, they didn't like this certain group of people, so Jesus kept hanging out with them because he was trying to drive this point home. He says, listen, every single person that you're eye to eye with is someone that I'm going to die for. Right. They are the other for which I want you to love. So listen, the question I want you to ask yourself when you come and you say, well, can I do this? Can I do that? I want to give you a new question. The question is this: what does love require of me? What does love require of me? Now here's the thing. At face value, you can take this and go all theoretical and that's good, and not have to make it land. Let me help it land a little bit. Let's say you consider yourself leaning politically left and you're on fire right now and you see things on the internet and you're just ready to lash out and you see that we have the KKK marching in streets and let me ask you a question. In regards to that person who is a part of the KKK, what does love require of you as regards to them? Oh, right? Yeah. You find yourself leaning more to the right politically, and you look at groups and movements, and you're so angry, and you're like, oh, they shouldn't be doing this, and you look at maybe movements like Black Lives Matter, and you're like, they're stirring things up, and then what does love require of you as you respond to them?
Good, so good.
As you find yourself, maybe you don't care. Maybe you're like, you know what, my life's all right. Facebook's just exhausting, like I'm good. Like I'm just gonna distance myself, like whatever. And that's your response. Okay, as someone with power, with authority, with a voice of any kind, what does love require of you when you see injustice? What about at the workplace where your boss is a jerk? What does love require of you? What about your professor that belittles you, that demeans you, that makes you feel stupid for your faith, and you want to lash out and prove them wrong? And you're going through this you're like, oh, there's something in here about professors, I know it. And you're going through, and you're like, I'm gonna get them. No, stop it. What does love require of you in that moment? See, when we can look at this, when that neighbor that drives you crazy, or that neighbor that's hurting, or that neighbor that's elderly and they can't take care of things, what does love require of you? Because Jesus gave us a new command. And he said, by this command, everyone will know that you're my followers if you love one another as I loved you. And Jesus spent so much of his time breaking out of the norms and saying, listen, it takes nothing to love someone you agree with, to love someone that you're friends with. That's nothing. And he went to the outskirts, to the other in society, and he kept loving on those people, and that got him killed. People are going, you can't do it, that's not right. Let's throw him off the cliff, he's done. Jesus spent his life giving us an example of what it looks like to love the other. And in a world that's so divided, that with so much stuff that's just messed up, love is requiring action of every single one of us. None of us get off the hook. And sometimes it's big and it's important, and sometimes it's little and it's important. When your kids are driving you crazy, you just want to lock them in the house and run. Been there. Was there last night. What does love require? At work, when you can cut the corner, you can kind of cheat things and no one's going to know, what does love require? The person cuts you off. When you're angry, what does love require? The fact that here in America, we are richer than the vast majority of the world's population. Every single one of us here are wealthy in the world's terms. What does love require of that? What do you do with that? We have to answer this question. This is the heart of horizontal morality. This is his covenant that he brings. He says that your love and devotion to God will be demonstrated and authenticated by how you treat the other, by how you treat those around you. And this is where we find ourselves today. So if you've been turned off by church, by God, it seems like they keep going through these all the time, I want to tell you some good news. That Jesus brought about a new covenant. And we've been wrestling, and we're not perfect, and every single one of us are going to stumble and make mistakes. But our goal is to become more like him. It's to love people like he loved them. And that's enough to keep me busy for a long time. And my goal is tomorrow, the rest of today, the rest of this week, this month, is to ask myself, what does love require of me? And to really do my best. And if there's something that happens between me and you, I got to fix that. I can't just say, oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that, God. I shouldn't have posted that. No, I go to you and I make it right. That is what love requires. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to close in prayer. And I'm going to pray over you as well. And we're going to go out from this place with that challenge, to ask ourselves that question. When you want to go, oh, can I do this? Can I do that? What does it look like? What does honor look like? What does generosity look like? What does wisdom look like? Is it best for them? Because if not, you have your answer. We begin to look at life through the lens of Jesus. I believe that could change not only this church, but I think that could change the city, our community. I think that could change a nation. Amen? Let's pray. God, I thank you